There are a lot of comic book characters that have some kind of sonic power, whether that be Banshee over at Marvel Comics or Banshee at DC Comics, maybe Tyrock or Black Canary. And one of the things that we see a lot when it comes to the artistic representation of a sonic scream or a sonic blast are these radio waves that emanate from the mouth of our character. Now, if we are looking at the character head on, then in Adobe After Effects, something like radio waves is a perfect way to represent this look. However, over the last couple of years, people have started to represent sonic screams in a variety of different ways where they're not always concentric circles. Now, something like radio waves in Adobe After Effects will certainly allow you to create a masked shape and change that shape, and you can do roughen edges or displacement or a bunch of other things to warp that perfect circle. So I'm not really concerned about how do we represent a sonic blast with radio waves from a head-on shot. Where After Effects fails is that it doesn't have radio waves as a 3D object or layer, meaning that even if you were to turn a layer 3D and apply radio waves to it, those radio waves don't emanate forward or backwards. They still emanate as a 2D plane. So in order to try to replicate that sonic scream, you have to go to other applications. It might be something that you create in Cinema 4D. It might be something that you have to use a plugin from Red Giant or even Element 3D. And all of these plugins are great. They're fantastic. I love Element 3D. I love Cinema 4D. I love everything that Red Giant puts out. However, for the average person working with After Effects, some of these plugins and some of these add-ons that you need to get to do this one effect might be a little bit too expensive for you. So in this tutorial, what I want to show you is how you can create your own sonic scream representation without needing an expensive plugin. So we're going to use only the stuff that we find in Adobe After Effects. And so the first clip that we are going to use is this clip of this man. And if we play through this, we can just basically see he's had enough. He's tired of all of this stuff that's going on. And he's just screaming at the top of his lungs, "I've had enough!" Ah! The problem is this clip has been slowed down considerably. So even when I add it to a composition, this is like 10 seconds long. And we really don't want this to be 10 seconds long. We want this to be more real time. So the first thing that I'm going to do is right click on this layer after I've added it to the composition. And I'm going to go to time and time stretch. And I calculated this out ahead of time, and really, in order for him to look like he is at normal speed, the stretch factor needs to be changed from 100% to 40%. And then now when we play this back, that looks maybe a little bit more realistic of someone who is really screaming. I'm just going to go ahead and move the work area to the end, and then I just right click and trim comp to work area, just so we have this here. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of different ways that you could create this sonic scream, in another application. But we want to do this with Adobe After Effects. And the easiest way to do that is to go to Layer, New Solid. We're going to go ahead and create a solid that's the size of the layer. Doesn't matter what color you use. And I'm going to call it Particle Scream just so that we can see what it is. And to this layer, I'm going to add the effect Particle World. I'm just going to drag it on this layer. Now, Particle World is one of the built-in particle systems that come with After Effects. And the reason why I'm going to use Particle World is because it's maybe a little bit easier to create the proper 3D direction that you're going to want or that you're going to need for this effect, and to make it versatile for every shot that we're going to work with. And as we scrub through here, you can see that we have a typical particle system. If I were to just turn this off for a moment and put in a CC particle system, you will notice that these two look almost exactly the same. The big difference is the ability to move this in 3D space. So CC particle system 2 is essentially the same thing. The big difference is the fact that particle world gives us this 3D representation of our world space. And this box up here is one that if you can click and drag, we can actually move around in this 3D space. This is also a particle system that works in After Effects 3D natively. So if you have a camera, you could actually move a camera around and have these particle systems track with it. So as we sit right now, there are a lot of particles coming out, and these don't look like waves at all. And of course, the wave representation that we're going to do here is maybe going to be a little bit different than what you might normally see, but we want to create something that does look different here. And so the first place that I think we're going to start is with the birth rate. And the birth rate really needs to be dropped down quite a bit to something like 1. And the other thing that we should probably look at is the physics of this layer. We don't want these particles exploding outward in all directions. We want this to go in one direction. So the type of animation that I'm going to use here is the direction axis. And now we see something that maybe looks a little bit more interesting, right? We could spin this around, maybe something like this, and we could even start to position this. Let's see where this guy's really screaming. That's kind of where he's at. So we could position this maybe right here, and we can move it up a little bit so it looks like it's coming right out of his mouth. Even just pick that up and move it if we need to something like that. Now that maybe looks maybe a little gross, but for the moment we have particles shooting out of this guy's mouth. And again, we can adjust the angle until we have this exactly like we want it. And that's the reason, another reason again, why I'm using the CC particle world is because I can use this box to kind of angle this in the direction of his face. So even if we wanted this to be, 90 degrees, or if we wanted it to be straight on, we could certainly do that again and again and again until we had something that was just right. Now, here's where things are going to get interesting, because we're going to go ahead and stick in the moment in the physics area. Okay. We've got our direction going right. We've kind of dragged this cube around so that we have the angle and the position kind of the way we want it. Now we need to fine tune these particles so it looks like a scream. And if we're doing an auditory scream, we don't want these particles to start to drift down. So we need to turn gravity off, right? So now we have this shooting out. There we go. Something like that. Maybe even something like that. However you want to align that. So now we have the particles coming out of his mouth, but the origin point's maybe a little bit too big. So let's jump over here to the, let's see. Let us go to the producer. And let's change this radius down to 0 for the X, Y, and Z. So now we have this more of a point. And again, we can just move this right to where we want it. And if we play through this guy is like future Godzilla, right? He's ready to fire off some radioactive beams. We've got this, the gravity turned off. We've got resistance turned off. But again, this angle kind of spreads out quite a bit. And that's what extra does. Extra kind of adds a little bit of extra spread onto this cone. So I'm going to change that down to 0 as well to kind of keep this cone as narrow as we possibly can. And for right now, 1 looks to be about right. Let's see if there's anything else here that I see that we need to deal with under physics. Probably not right at the moment. So let's look at the particles, because again, we want something that looks like a sound wave and not something that looks like, he's shooting a laser beam out of his mouth. So under the particles, we've talked before about particle type, and there are a lot of particle types we could choose. We could choose star if we wanted to. That doesn't look very much like sound waves. We could probably go down here to like a motion polygon if we wanted, if he wants to shoot like daggers out of his mouth, or a tetrahedron, right? These don't look like those concentric waves or circles that we've seen before. However, when we look at bubble, it kind of does, from a particular point of view, look like a concentric ring. And again, if we play this, we get to see these bubbles kind of come out and make shapes and rounded shapes. And to be honest, this might be more akin to what an actual sonic blast would be from someone's mouth if they were screaming, ah! Because there would be some wavering. There would be something more than just a sine wave representation of that scream. So I think bubble might be the way to go for this scream. And again, I can just come in here and move this down just a little bit so we get it right where we want it coming out of his mouth. So this might be pretty good. Now, these bubbles now kind of stay the same size throughout the piece. So I think I'm going to lower the birth size, or actually increase the birth size to something like 0.5. That might be too much. How about 0.05? That's kind of small. We might tweak this a little bit. The depth size is at the end of the life of these bubbles. How big do we want them to get? And I think for this one, we really want to crank that up to like 4. Get these bubbles really big, really fast to kind of recreate that cone coming out of his mouth. I don't want to have any size variation in these bubbles, so let's change that down to 0. I think that still looks pretty good. I don't know what 0.5 would look like. That doesn't look too bad. I mean, if we're looking at kind of the shape of his mouth, you know, you can adjust to taste on this, and really you can adjust it for however you want this project to look. But now we have something that kind of looks like, and I'll start it here, kind of looks like a blast of something coming out of his mouth. All right. We're almost done, to be honest. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change the birth color and the death color both to white. And I'll just go pure white, and we'll leave these. So we get areas that are pure white and more solid, and areas that are a little bit softer and see-through and transparent. That's kind of what we want as this goes through, so we get some warbling kind of going on through here. Only thing I might want to do is increase the longevity of these particles. And what that'll do is it'll give them a longer chance to live through this shot. So it'll actually allow them to go a little bit further. We don't have to change anything with velocity. I think that that's fine. So here's what we have now. I hate you, 2020. I'm so fed up with this. Right? So I think we're almost there at this point. So let us, you know, we can't have the bubbles start before he screams. So I think right about here, I'm just going to take this layer and I'm going to just move and slide the whole layer down. And now we have something that looks like this. Ah. And let's tweak this timing. I think that looks okay. We can see the bubbles are already coming out of his mouth. Now we may expect, or you may want, the producer to start here. And that's fine. And you can always tweak this a little bit and animate that the position, the producer position on the X, Y, and Z so that you get this exactly the way you want it. So let's just kind of do that really quick. So he's going to start kind of up here when he first starts to scream. And then by the time he gets down to here, well, actually, by the time he's here, we're just going to move this position down to here. Whoops. I'm actually moving the layer, which is what I don't want to do. So let's do that again. Let's move this up. Whoops. Move this up just a little bit. to right there. And then a few frames forward, we can move this down to there, and maybe, whoops, not that much. Maybe right there. And maybe that's going to stay the same. So maybe all we have to do is animate the Y. And the nice thing about this is because we're moving the position, notice that our bubbles will also move. I'm just going to continue to move this down just a little bit more. Whoops, not too much. Right there. There we go. I think that'll work. And again, this is not to replace or change the way other people might represent a sonic scream, but I think this might be an alternative way that will work pretty good for most of you. Okay, so now we're actually ready to create that warping that goes on with the background and the surrounding areas when people try to represent this sonic scream. And in order to do that, I'm going to go back down here to the video layer, and we're going to go over to our effects, and we're going to look for a displacement map under distort. And we're just going to apply this to our video layer. And in this effect, it's going to say, hey, man, I see you're trying to distort some stuff. What are you going to use as the layer that you want us to use as a reference to distort? And we actually want to use the particle scream layer. And we don't only want to use the source, but we want to use the masks and effects because there is an effect applied to this layer. The next thing that is great about the displacement map is it allows us to displace both horizontally and vertically based on different information. It could be one of the color channels, it could be an alpha channel, the luminance channel, so much stuff that we can displace here. If I remember correctly, and this goes all the way back to like 1995, 1996, I remember that the reason why it defaults to red and green for the horizontal and vertical here is because one of the particle systems that were originally there would generate red and green particles, and you could displace the red particles horizontally and the green particles vertically in that to create a very shimmering heat wave effect with the particle system, and I think it was just Particle Playground, and the displacement map. So I'm going to change both of these to luminance, and I think I'm going to increase the displacement. Let's start with 40. Let's do this a great deal. And in order to, well, we can go ahead and wrap the pixels around if we want, but in order to really see the effect of this, I'm just going to turn the visibility for this layer off. And now if we play this, and let's watch this area where the bubbles were, we can see that we have this shimmering of the background. And even when his hands come in, we get that shimmering. And I kind of dig that. I think that's a pretty cool representation of a scream. I think that looks rather neat. Now, you may want to do something a little different here. You may think that, and let's move down to where his hands are. You may think that that is too sharp and too defined. You could go in and add a radial blur using CC Radial Blur. You could add that to this particle scream layer, and I'll just turn this back on so we can kind of see what's going on. Oh no, I don't want to use a radial blur. Sorry, I want to use a direction blur in this case. A directional blur. That's the one that I want to use. And we can, I'm going to just crank this up to, I don't know, let's make it really large, something like 30 to begin with. And then all you would have to do is change that direction blur to kind of align with the direction of the scream. And now when we turn the visibility of this layer off, you can see we have a very different kind of warp going on. It's a little bit smoother, but I think it also looks a little funkier when he raises his hand and puts it in the stream or behind the stream, as we have it here, where his hands just kind of look a little bit more warpy. Again, it's up to you. If you want to use the directional blur, feel free. I think that this is a nice little enhancement that can make this effect uniquely your own. But personally for me, I'm going to turn off the directional blur. The other problem with this effect is that unless there is something that contrasts greatly with the background or has a bunch of different colors or something in the background, like we see with this lamp or like we see when his hand comes in the picture, it's actually rather difficult to see the warping that's going on, the displacement that's going on of the pixels, because here we kind of have almost a fractal noise type background with this cement. And so as we're watching this, yeah, we can kind of see a blur going on, but it's not really that great. So there's a way that we can fix this, or enhance it, I should say. I shouldn't say it's a fix, because maybe you want to leave it exactly like this. I'm going to go to my particle screen layer, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to turn on the visibility, and we'll go back up here. I'll just go ahead and delete this directional blur on this duplicate layer. But I'm going to go down to the producer. No, let's go down to the particle. Yeah, the particle. And instead of bubble, what I'm going to do is change this to a faded sphere. Okay, so we get something that kind of looks like this, kind of smoke, almost like smoke coming out of his mouth, right? And I'm going to change this color to something else. It can be whatever you want. So you could have this be, some people might want to use a light blue for both of these. And actually, you could just change that birth color. Okay, you could use a light blue. And depending on the color that you want, the next thing that I would do is probably lower the transparency to something like 10%, something really low, so that you can just barely see that color. You can see it, the two different versions of that. And also I would change the transfer mode to something like a screen or an add or even a lighten, just depending on what you want to do. And you could vary this transparency however you want. So here is 15% versus 10%. Again, if maybe you don't like the blue, maybe you want to go something with green, man. This is the reason why he's so angry, is that he forgot his breath mints this morning. And he's got this this green haze coming out of his mouth. So now when we go back and look at this, and again, I'm not changing anything besides the particle type and the birth color. And now when I do this, we get this kind of greenish haze going on. Now, this actually, I deleted that directional blur. This might be one of those moments where you want to bring the directional blur back, or maybe you would, I think maybe we could even apply a fractal noise pattern to this upper layer. I'll crank this back up to 100% just so that we can see it. And you can see that as we add this together, so let's go with maybe a screen on this or a multiply. There we go. Now we have a broken up pattern that is moving through the piece. And you could animate that if you wanted. So now if we bring this back down to 15%, it's super subtle, but we do have that kind of a little fractal background going on there. Okay, that's how I would do a Sonic Scream using no third-party plugins and using only the default version of After Effects. And here's the other reason why I would use this. Some people might just say, well, just create a ring layer and use a whole bunch of those different rings, turn those into 3D layers and move them through the 3D space, and that would work. But what I'm trying to do is kind of create a custom canon that I could use however I wanted. So for example, if we now bring in this clip, I'll just drop it right here for a moment. Let's turn this back on so we can kind of see where we're going with this. We still have this same system. I'll just turn this off for the moment. Effects, whoops, here's our effect. It is now super easy for me to rotate this. Let's say we've got it lined up with her. I'll just move it over here so that we can see what's going on. All I have to do is move this producer position to where her mouth is and rotate this forward to something like that. And maybe more like that. Let's do something like that. And when I'll just copy the displacement map, put it onto here, and make sure that we're using our particle screen layer correctly and luminance, etc. We might want to lower this down a little bit. 20 and 20, perhaps. But now we have... Oh, and definitely we want to put a blur on here, I think. This time we'll just leave it on for a moment, just so we can soften that edge up. But now we have this same effect coming at us from a more forward view. And that's what I like about this. Yes, we do have some warping of the image going on, and we can fix that in another way. But again, going back to the reason why I wanted to use this particle world is because I can angle this into whatever angle I need to and have a little bit easier time repositioning this layer to get this customized scream used throughout. So this would be perfect if the person is turning their face, if they're doing a sweep of their sonic blast, where they are turning their head side to side. All you would need to do is align that producer position in the right spot. And let's undo a couple of these. And you would have this right where you need it, and you would just have to, sweep the room as that blast is coming out and following that person's head. So I think that this is super versatile. Maybe this is not a concussive blast or a sonic blast that you want to use because it doesn't look like everybody else. That's kind of the point of doing a special effect, is to make it recognizable. Yes, this person is screaming, and yes, we are getting some kind of distortion because of how loud and how intense his scream is, but it looks unique and it looks different than what everyone else is doing. So there you go. There is your own default After Effects, no third-party plugin, using Displacement Map and CC Particle World to create your own sonic scream. So throw open the windows, stick out your head and scream, "I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." Or whatever that you want to scream. Maybe you want to scream for ice cream. Take care, everybody.